Hello, Smart Money 2 podcast listeners. Welcome to this week's show. My name is Kirk Chisholm. I'll be your host. Today, I'm joined with John Gestal. How you doing, John?
I'm good, Kirk. Thanks for having me.
Good. Well, glad to have you on. And we're going to be talking about some interesting alternative assets today. John, why don't you tell us a bit about your background for the listeners who aren't familiar with who you are?
Yeah, so I run the investor relations side of Royalty Exchange, which is the largest marketplace for buying intellectual property assets. The primary asset you'll find there is music. Just naturally, the royalty ecosystem for music is the most common, but you'll find other stuff too. So we branch to all forms of intellectual property. I've been doing that for about 7 years, basically through the royalties boom and a lot of interesting music industry currents. And so, yeah, that's what we do.
Cool. So let's we were talking a little bit about the sh before the show about a lot of this stuff, but what's tell me a little bit about how it works with music. I mean, we've seen a lot of things recently in the news about some artists' catalogs being sold, even some current artists, which is still kind of weird to me. But tell listeners a little bit about this. Like, how does that work? How do the royalty exchanges work with music?
Yeah. So as I'm sure most can imagine, it's a pretty complex system of reporting. So basically, how it works is when someone creates music, everyone who helped create that music, whether they're a songwriter, a singer, a producer, or whatever they might be, they all get a share of the royalties generated by that song or book or whatever it might be. And those, splits can differ in size between, the performing artist versus a writer. But all those people collect. So they then publish the music through a publisher. They'll have a record label that will promote the music and put it on the radio, get it on Spotify, things like that. And as people listen to it, each of those listens will generate a royalty that ultimately flows back to those content creators. So it's done primarily through licenses. So, like for example, performers' rights organizations, every country has their own. They'll give out licenses for people to play music. So Spotify pays for a license. Even, your restaurant down the street from you that plays music over their loudspeaker, they'll pay a license. All of those licenses create this big pool of capital, which basically gets split up by the number of plays for any given song. And that's kind of how they divvy that up. So the more songs listened to, the more money it generates for the creators. And that splits out a number of different ways, but ultimately it flows through to the publishers, to the record labels, the songwriters, the performing artists, everyone who's got a stake in it. So that's kind of the general ecosystem. And this reporting is done on a global scale. Every country will report the plays. Every concert they'll put their track list that they played and submit that. And so that's kind of how the ecosystem works. And then yeah, the publishers will pay out every quarter, every half year, once a year, monthly, kind of whatever their schedule works. So on Royalty Exchange, what we do is we take those shares of the royalties. So say you're working with a songwriter, they're earning from everything that they've done, whether that's, working with Justin Bieber or Jay-Z or, Britney Spears or whatever, they're earning from each of those tracks. And those are all individual royalty entitlements that they're collecting on. They can then go and sell that. So we created this marketplace where people can now transact this stuff, create liquidity for it. Um, and it becomes a good passive income investment vehicle that's largely uncorrelated from equities, traditional markets, things like that. So it becomes a little hedge too. But that's just how our system works compared to the general royalty ecosystem and how this asset class kind of is created through that.
So let me ask you this. So let's say I don't know. I think Michael Jackson's music was sold at one point, right?
It has been sold. The
Okay.
other big tie to Michael Jackson is he bought the Beatles catalog a number of
Uh,
years ago, which, that was kind of during a time when it was pretty stigmatized to sell your catalog, and then with a huge name like the Beatles too, and then Michael Jackson became a
yeah.
big controversy. But
So I guess so. I got a bunch of questions about this. So first of all, so let's say so Michael Jackson bought the Beatles catalog. If you look at these royalties, are they all standardized or is every single one an individual weird and different contract?
It's a good question. There is some standardization in the industry generally. So, when you look at a contract from Universal compared to Sony, compared to Warner Music or whatever, all the contracts will be pretty similar, and there may be nuance between the two depending on the artist, right? If it's a brand new artist getting a record deal or something like that, that's going to be different from, Michael Jackson penning his 10th album or whatever, right? So there will be different parameters between those. Um, but generally, there's some pretty standard language between all the contracts that you'll see a lot of places. So a bit of both.
Okay. And then so are people typically so let's say the Beatles sell their album or their license to their album. Um, are they how are they structured? Is it because the royalties that are paid to the artists continually over time, they're selling that cash flow. Are they typically selling all of it, or are they selling part of it, or they still retain some income from it, or how does that work?
So it kind of depends on for our purposes what they want to do. But they'll be collecting cash flow from those royalties from a few different places, right? The performers' rights organizations, these are companies like ASCAP and BMI in the United States. They'll pay out directly to songwriters and also to publishers. And then the songwriter will also earn from the publisher, depending on what stakes they actually own. And then there will be a separate royalty stream that will come from the record label, which would be the sound recording royalty compared to the musical composition royalty, which are two different branches of royalties. So there will be a lot of different streams that will come through. Now, if someone wanted to sell everything that they had, that would require working with several different entities to make sure everything is, copacetic. Um, So generally, depending on the scale and what you're looking at, someone will sell just one stream because it's simple. They'll sell just their performers' rights earnings versus like their full copyrights of everything that they have, just for simplicity's sake. But there are plenty of institutional buyers who will buy the whole thing. Um, there's like Round Hill Music, for example, is a big one that's out there. I mean, even the major publishers will buy catalog to add to their own repertoire to earn off of. And in that case, they'll buy, the copyrights and everything underlying that goes with it. Um, but it will vary depending on what's available.
So how does let's take a quick step back just to because I know that it's a complicated spaghetti soup of income that they make. Uh, when you have a performer, I mean, I don't know. I mean, let's say I don't know, pick a name. I listen to music so long. But look at somebody like Taylor Swift, right? I mean, she's got songs, she does performances, if you think of like how are performers paid? Like what are the streams of income? How much do they get paid for each? Because I've heard that they get almost nothing for each record that's sold, and now that you have things like Spotify where they get even less. Like, how does all that work? Like, where do they get paid? How much do they get paid? Where are the incentives for them to do certain things? Like, I'm just out of curiosity.
Yeah, so for an artist like Taylor Swift, a huge part of her earnings are going to come from the royalties. I mean, you may have heard of the big Taylor Swift buyback where she bought back her master recordings and re-recorded a bunch of that stuff to get it back from Scooter Braun, who was her manager at the time. Um, so for an artist like Taylor Swift, it's going to be a lot from that, from her royalties, because she's got a very dedicated fan base, but then also from her live performances. I'm sure everyone remembers on the last year or two, she had her $1 billion World Eras tour, which made a ton of money. So for her, it's gonna be things like that. Generally, for many artists, a lot will come from royalties and from advances, actually. So their publisher or their record label will advance them earnings and then collect the royalties generated from the music in place of that to pay off the advance. So a lot of artists will do a combination of that. Now, royalties, aside from the two pieces, which will come from the record label versus the publishing side, um, the other major piece is Spotify, of course, streaming. Now, the way the streaming royalties work is it's done based on a percentage of revenue collected by the digital service provider, whether that's Spotify, Apple Music, whatever. And these are royalty rates that are actually set by institutions. So in the US, it's the Copyright Royalty Board who sets this stuff. And every 5 years, they kind of re-examine the royalty rates to make sure that it's keeping up with technology and inflation, things like that. So every 5 years, they'll reset those royalty rates, but it's generally some percentage of revenue from streaming services. Um, for the streaming stuff. Now that's going to be specifically for what's called the mechanical royalty, which is one of the many splits of royalties that come out. Um, but that's the other big one that people look at just because streaming is, the way people listen to music these days. Um, so understanding that in particular is an important piece of the puzzle. Um, but yeah, so it's depending on the artist and their activity, you'll either see it from their live performances, like Taylor Swift, or from the royalties um, through streaming and record sales, things like that.
I mean, in comparison, I mean, I don't know how radio used to work, but I imagine they get paid each time a song is played. So,
Yep.
but my
So
understanding is like streaming, they get paid a lot less.
yeah, so the percentages are different. Radio in particular is unique because that will focus on, high traffic times, right? And they'll get bonus payments for that. Um, and because streaming has such high volume, it kind of adjusts the payout amounts. Now, it's not quite as simple as like, 0.0001 cents per play. It's not quite that simple. And same with radio. The peak traffic times will have different bonus payments that contribute to the earnings. But they do have different royalty rates. And again, those are set by larger institutions to make sure it's fair and accounted for. So that people aren't getting screwed, stuff like that.
All right. So, so in terms of profitability for an artist, so it sounds like the pretty much the live performances is where they get paid the most.
Probably just because they're bringing in ticket sales, which is going to translate to a big payday in a single day. Um, Other ways they could earn would be through like synchronization, which is basically when you synchronize music to video. So that's things like a commercial, or say there was a big song in a movie or TV show. Um, as of late, Kate Bush in Stranger Things was a huge phenomenon, had a huge resurgence in royalties. I mean, it translated as streaming, but high profile placements like that can also be significant. Um, but it's really a combination of all that stuff for especially for super popular artists, that'll draw a big following. A live performance can do a lot. And it'll have a ripple effect with the rest of the revenue streams. All right. So like let's think about you're going to a concert for an artist you like. As you're getting ready for the concert, you may stream your favorite songs from that artist in preparation, right? And then you compound that across, everyone going to the show or all the fans of the artists who are seeing shows later, right? And then you have this kind of like rising tide in the general back catalog of an artist because people are listening to their songs in preparation of seeing them live. Then you have the live performance on top of it, which people pay for, and then you might have merchandise or whatever goes along with that. Um, but the layers add up and become significant.
Well, I hear a lot about how artists aren't paid very much because there's so many different layers of the cake. Is that changing now? I know it used to be that the record label or the person signing them would basically get rights in perpetuity, and they would totally take advantage of these artists. Um, I don't know if that's happening now or still happening, or like talk a little bit about the cake layers. Like how many people are involved and what do they ultimately get
Yeah,
as a range?
it's definitely shifting. And this kind of will get into the AI conversation too, right? Um, and just the general digital tools that are at disposal of artists. Everyone's heard a horror story about a record label, screwing an artist. There's however many biopics about some artists getting screwed, right? It happens not infrequently. But it's so easy for an artist these days to self-publish or to release their own records without having to get a record deal or something like that. So you're hearing less and less of those "I signed a bad contract" stories. Um, and then, with the AI tools that are being released to kind of help artists with their mastering and their production, things like that, there are just less hands in the pie that are required to create high quality content. And it becomes a double-edged sword, right? As we get into the AI conversation and AI artists and what that really means for the ecosystem and things like that. But um, as far as layers of the cake go, artists now have options. And so they don't have to sign on to some crazy record label deal where, they give everything to the label. They can do it themselves. Now, granted, there are still a lot of strengths that come with signing with a major publisher or a major label, right? There's a lot of marketing support, production support, expertise in the industry that can go a long way. But you aren't required to do it like you were, 10, 15 years ago when the technology just wasn't quite there. Um, so for artists today, it is easier to get around that stuff. Um, but ultimately, it'll come down to what the goal is for the artist and how much support they think they need. Like an artist like Taylor Swift, who does a huge production, there's a lot of support that had to go with that, especially in the early days. Today, I think she could probably do it mostly on her own, just because she is such a big artist. But that's not necessarily the case for an up and comer.
Yeah, I mean, if I think of all these people who are doing, smoky clubs trying to get the name out, they're still
Right.
doing that, right? I mean, they're trying to get a name. I mean, I would imagine that it's still really hard to get found on Spotify, just like it's hard to get found on the podcast networks.
Oh
Like
yeah,
it's you
absolutely.
have to they're not going to sell you. I mean, this show's been around since 2014, I think. I mean, one of the longest running financial podcasts, and there's no marketing. We have to do it all. Like they don't do it for us.
Hmm.
It's not like the internet where people just search for stuff and find you. It doesn't happen. So I imagine it's the same for musicians, right? They have to do the legwork. Um, I don't how easy is it now to get found as a musician? Because yeah, there's more access, but there's more people too, and there's more stuff out there, and maybe
Yeah.
it's harder to get found.
Uh, I would say it's equally as hard today as it was always historically. Um, it's really just the journey that's changed. And this, you know, speaking more on the tech side of things, and we were talking about the algorithms earlier, but social media has also changed the game, right? Um, you could see an old song go on a viral TikTok spree and all of a sudden be earning gangbuster dollars, right? And that can lead to artist discovery, things like that. Um, I've also heard of artists discovering other artists that have blown up, again, through social media, things like that. So aside from, playing at your smoky bar and, getting found by a talent scout at some point, compared to going viral on TikTok or Instagram, still hard. But again, technology has enabled a lot. So if the right thing hits the right time, it can lead to, I don't want to say stardom, but it certainly can lead to a elevated profile. We see it all the time, actually. Tate McRae is a big one. I mean, she was found on I want to say Instagram, maybe TikTok, and she's now a big pop star. Um, just a good example. But yeah, it's really just changed the direction for discovery. Not so much the difficulty of it. It's still super hard.
Yeah, it's an interesting industry. I've never really gone down the rabbit hole with it, but I've always been intrigued by the complexity of it and how it works. It's kind of like the movie industry too.
Oh yeah.
We get pitched all the time. Oh, you can invest in a movie. I'm like, what? Just I'm not getting a tax deduction for this loss. Like you're you're basically investing in your ego when you invest in a movie because there's no return on that.
Yeah, at least not for a long time, right? Depending on what kind of global rights you sell for the for the streaming or whatever. But
Well, I mean, almost never. Like, I get pitched this all the time. Like, oh, you should invest in this movie. It's gonna be a great movie. I'm like, okay, how much am I gonna get? Like, even if it does well, it's carved up so many times that if you get anything,
Right.
You're most likely just going to lose your money. But if you get anything, it'd be very, very minuscule. You're basically doing it so you can get a producer credit and have your name in lights.
Yeah.
It's kind of silly, but that's what
Yeah.
people do.
You know, when you talk about entertainment as an investment, the vanity aspect becomes inevitable, which I think is really funny. So we always like to focus on the hard numbers and the financials. You know, we're talking about cash flows, things like that. But no matter what, the conversation always cycles to, well, I do or don't like that genre, artist, name, song, you know, insert whatever here. Um, but it's unavoidable. It's unavoidable. And I understand, you know, like if you like what you're investing in, you're more attracted to it, right? It makes perfect sense. Um, it's just funny how sometimes that can supersede the fiscal element. Um, and we see it not infrequently, more than you would expect, especially when talking about uh, investing.
Yeah, you mentioned entertainment as an investment. It's interesting because I mean, in the last year, we saw a ton of pitches for sports entertainment and,
Oh yeah.
huge investments going into that. People can say, "Hey, I'm an owner of this team or these teams," and, all these private equity funds, and I, good for you. You know, I will say that in the last few years, the opportunity to grow through sports entertainment it still is in its early stages, but the fact that owners are willing to give it up and sell it to the public tells me it's probably not worth what you think it is. So the opportunity is probably a lot smaller than you think because why would they ever give up their gold mine? For decades they've never done that, and now they're doing it. So
Yeah.
just
Yeah, that's a good point.
got to make
It's a
you
good
think.
point. It also kind of extends to just in recent history, the expansion of NIL, name, image, likeness. Um, actually, a couple of years ago, we co-hosted a webinar um, where a new fund was coming up that was doing purely NIL investments in college and upcoming athletes, and it was interesting to learn about it because it's such a new thing. I mean, even now, if you watch college sports, all the coaches at the end of the game always try and temper the fans. Don't charge the field, or we'll get fined for the NIL stuff for the artists. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
it's interesting how it changes. The landscape changes, especially with like the access
yeah.
and letting other people into, like you said, the proverbial gold mine.
Yeah, I think in some ways, I mean, we had a guest on a few months ago. We talked about the NIL, and she was an expert in football.
Mhm.
I think it's ruining the sport. I think sports are getting ruined, honestly. And I'm not saying the athletes don't deserve it; they do. But the the way that the sports are going, they're getting monetized way too much, and it's just wrecking the sport. You can't just have fun anymore. Everyone's got to make money at it. And it's just the whole system. It starts. My kids play hockey, so they started when they were younger. It's all money grabs the whole way up.
Yeah,
Um, I could just tell you so many examples, but it disgusts me. Like growing up, you played because you loved it.
right.
Now it's like, you got to do this, you got to do this, and it's like, oh, you got to pay this. And it's like, you know what? Even baseball, like people are playing all year round in gyms, and it's like, just take the season off, play another sport, have fun. Like it's just, I don't know. To me, I'm just turned off by it. I used to love it growing up, but I feel like it's destroying like the innocence of sports for kids when they're young.
Yeah,
And
I could see
um,
that. I mean,
because you have NAL for college. What about high school? Why not
right?
high school? Why not
Where's the line?
junior high, right? Why not Little League? I mean, it just doesn't stop.
Yeah,
That's the
yeah,
problem.
yeah. It's to kind of tie it back to music a little bit. It it's like a way to capture the super fan, which is a big push in the music industry that I've seen that I don't exactly agree with, but Spotify, for example, is doing a big buy our premium packages of Spotify and you get all this extra stuff. So they're courting the super fan as like an investment whale, so to speak. And I think it's just an odd way to go in a volume
Yeah.
game. Um,
Well, they're taking the casino. I mean, that's the casino approach. That's the template casinos
yeah,
use, right? You make all your money off the whales. Everything else is just paying the bills, but your profit comes from the whales. So
yeah.
I get
Yeah.
it. I mean, I don't agree with it. It's kind of like Amazon saying, "Hey, you get your Prime and you get Amazon Prime for free and you get all this stuff." And now they have commercials in there. It's like, why do we have commercials? Well, if you pay an extra $2, $3 a month, you won't have commercials. Like, come on,
All right.
really? We
All right.
playing that game?
Yeah, I mean Netflix lately too, right? They're adding in a an ad tier to
But
their
that's
system too,
but
and
that's not for people paying the normal price. You can pay less and get ads, right? I mean, it's not
I
like they're
think so.
upcharging you.
I have not been keeping too much up with it with the whole Warner Brothers acquisition and all
Oh
that, but
God, yeah, that's I just this is why it's so hard to follow because there's so it's like I always want to know like how are these people making money? Like they're selling these I mean, look at Amazon. They bought the James Bond franchise.
yeah,
What have they done with it? Like nothing. If anything, I heard they're destroying it.
yeah,
That's I don't know if we haven't seen that, but like I can't even access it on Amazon like they own it. It should be accessed for free. No, I have to pay for it on Amazon Prime. Like, what? Don't you guys own it? Isn't this the whole point? But
yeah.
I think it's, look what Disney did with Marvel. I mean,
Hmm.
they over monetized it. Now no one wants to watch it.
Yep,
So
yep.
it's interesting. I mean, it's the balance of money and art, but yeah, it's
Yeah, but
it's incredible.
to your question, right? Like who's getting paid on this stuff? And in in a perfect world, or the world that, we try to create, it goes to the content creators, right? Yeah, you have your middlemen, your studios, your publishers, whatever, who are helping to make the IP strong. But in a perfect world, yeah, the creators get that portion of it.
Yeah.
And kind of tangential to that, um, and the super fan and all that we've been talking about, um, as it relates back to intellectual property, is how do people access the intellectual property that aren't the funds, aren't the larger buyers who still want to capitalize on this stuff? Maybe they're a super fan. What does that look like for them? And we see a lot of that in the fractionalized offerings. Pay $50 and you can get a piece of Justin Bieber or Drake or something like that, right? Um, and does that model work? It's kind of similar to the ad tiers that you see in streaming and stuff like that, right? It's just a smaller piece and a smaller return. Um, for us, like the returns suffer a lot when you fractionalize like that, but it is also an access point for people, and that's important too. So
But that, I mean, I think that applies for all assets. I mean, what you're talking about, the fractionalization, we've seen it in the art world too. There's a few
hmm.
people selling fractionalized art, like famous Monets and whatever. I won't mention the name because there's some, row about them and a few others. But um, we've seen that because people want access. You see it
Yeah,
in the hedge fund world. You say, "Oh, I want to access the best hedge fund manager." Oh yeah, sure you can. And these 10 other hedge fund managers, and you look at the returns and they're returning 20% a year, but you're getting two. They're like,
right,
why the hell are you getting so little? It's like because they're slicing up the pie so many times that by the time you get your returns, everyone's taking a piece. And so the fractionalization, it doesn't make sense because there's so many hands in the pie that you don't end up getting anything. I
right.
think
And
that's
what's
the
the point?
downside with it. Yeah. Right. And
Yeah.
what's the whole point? Yeah, because you just want to seem cool and talk about it with your buddies at the golf club. I mean,
And that's the super fan angle,
right.
right? It's like you do if it's I mentioned earlier the vanity aspect, also known as the cool aspect. Like exactly like you're saying, right? You're on the golf course, say, "Hey, oh, I own a piece of Justin Bieber," or whatever. It's like, okay, well, you're actually losing money on it because you're only getting 2%. You're not even beating inflation or anything like that, right? So we try and fix that. So we don't do the fractionalized offering, and it helps quite a bit. Returns, our average returns that we see for acquisitions end up being like 12%, something like that. It's pretty solid.
I would imagine you probably have to have a big amount of capital to get in though, because I imagine some of
Yeah,
these.
that's kind of the delineation, right? Now you don't necessarily need to be an accredited investor level buyer, but our median catalog value is like around 80 or 90K. Um, floats up or down, kind of depending on the year and what's going on. Um, so yeah, you need capital on hand to buy stuff. Um,
Well, it's not terrible, 80,
yeah,
90K
it's
for a
not
whole
terrible.
catalog.
It's really not terrible. Um, but one of the great parts of royalties is that the cash flow is directly indicative of the demand, right? Because it's a volume-based earning. So if it's earning a lot, you can pretty safely say, hey, this is a strong IP because it's earning from a lot of places. You may not know the artist or the genre, but if the maths, then yeah, why not, right? Um, but yeah, we see a whole wide range. Stuff that's just 10K, stuff that's millions of dollars. So it's a huge spectrum.
So how do you I mean, you would hope that royalty, you're going to get a pretty predictable cash flow, but obviously, as we talked about earlier, it's somewhat dependent upon how active they are, how
Mhm.
promotional they are. Are they on tour? Are they doing these things? So, how do you, or maybe they just disappear for one reason or another, right? And they retire. Um, was it, I forget, was it Floyd that, I guess some of the members died or they retired. I forget what it was, but there was some big old school band that either retired or died, and it was I didn't follow it, but I thought it was Floyd. Something happened, but anyway. But so how does that work? Because that obviously impacts the cash flow of the royalties.
Yeah, this is kind of like the golden question of music, right? And it kind of gets to the psychology of how people consume music a little bit. Um, Now, in the industry, it's referred to as seasoning of a catalog. We call it dollar age on royalty exchange, but it's effectively how old is the music compared to the earnings. Um, Now, the older a catalog is, generally, the less volatile the earnings will be period to period. Um, Now, when we take a step back and think about how music is released and people consume it, at the initial release, it's got marketing, promotion, hype that goes along with it, right? We talked about radio. It gets on the radio, it gets in those premium slots, gets those premium bonus payments. Maybe it's an earworm. People stream it 100 times a day because it's stuck in their head, whatever. Um, Now, that initial surge normally lasts years 1 to 3 of the earnings, something like that. Kind of varies, but it's in that early life that you see a huge, huge spike. Now, from that pinnacle of earnings, you'll see a drop off anywhere between 60 to 80 to 90% from that drop to what would be considered a trough, but really it's just a leveling off of the earnings. And that happens between, years 3 and call it 6, maybe 7. So you have this kind of big bell at the early life that then flattens out to a tail of earnings that tends to be pretty consistent, right? When you think about music that you may have listened to when you were younger, or that your parents listened to, well, their music tastes probably didn't change too much as they aged. Same goes for everybody, right? The songs that I listened to when I was 15 years old, I still listen to them just at less frequency than I did back then. That's the same phenomenon that we're seeing in that bell curve to tail earnings behavior that applies to most music. So with the seasoning of a catalog, the dollar age, whatever, the aging of the catalog, you try and measure where in that lifespan the earnings might be, whether it's in the beginning and the volatile big spike, or if you're later on in that tail of earnings, which are going to be fairly consistent because people are listening to their favorite songs. So generally, people who are looking for that consistent cash flow, they're looking for the older stuff and they want to buy it for the life of the copyright so that they just get that consistent cash flow every every quarter or whatever it might be for the next 30, 40, 50, 80, 100 years, whatever it might be. Um, so that's the general philosophy on music consumption and how people kind of approach royalties. Most people are looking for that consistent income that happens in the later life of the music. Um, the other thing to consider is how it's being consumed, because that's going to have a big impact on the volatility you'd expect. Think, for example, a song that's made specifically for an advertisement. that's designed to play for 6 months, and then that ad disappears as, the company moves on to different branding, whatever. That's going to obviously be way less um, secure than Taylor Swift's streaming every month, right? So the source of the earnings and the point of consumption matters quite a bit as far as what to expect moving forward. Like Christmas music, for example. I mean, we just had the holidays. Christmas music, if it's popular, like, Mariah Carey, well, every Christmas, yeah, you're going to see a big uptick, and that could be consistent in its own right. Just as long as you can appreciate that it's going to be concentrated to a time period, but still the annual earnings are going to be probably relatively consistent. So yeah, between the sources, the age, I mean, what the content is and who the artist is matters too, but primarily we're looking at those two factors, source and age.
So when you say it drops off 80, 90%, I assume people aren't selling their rights at the peak. They're, my guess is
Um,
that probably doesn't happen that often.
Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. It's hard to put a consistency level on it. Um, we definitely see it sometimes, if someone's got an emergency or, they need cash now, sometimes they'll do it. Um, but yeah, generally it's a little bit later than that just because yeah, they've got the big income coming in. But we see plenty of catalogs that are just a year old or some that are 2 or 3 years old. And we see plenty that are 20, 30, 40 years old. Um, so again, kind of depends on what's happening at the time. Um, but you see all types, all types.
Do you now when people are selling you so their catalog, let's dig into that a little bit. Is
Mhm.
it a singular song or is it an album or is it a miscellaneous grab bag of songs or how do people do it?
Depending on the need, um, I would say most often it's what you would say a grab bag of songs. So say it's a songwriter who's, worked with 15 different artists of various calibers and they want to sell all of that stuff. Okay, we'll sell all of that stuff for you. Say it's an artist like, oh, I just want to sell this one track because it makes the most money and maybe the rest of the stuff I could still earn from. Great. Let's look at that one track, package that into a one track catalog, sell just that. We try to meet the artists where they are. Um, help fill their need as well as providing an asset class to investors who want that cash flow. So we're servicing two sides of the market in that respect. Um, and that creates a lot of variation in just the kinds of assets that we see.
Okay. Makes sense. Now, you kind of mentioned earlier, we haven't gotten to it till now, but AI, I noticed, I didn't realize it was this close, but I was listening to one of the Joe Rogan shows, and he kind of pointed out one of the tracks that 50 Cent did with some old time, I think it was jazz. It was interesting. It was really one of them was really good, and I was like, wow. I was amazed. I mean, I had to go find it. It was really not easy to find, but when I found it, I was amazed at how really good it was. And of course, I can't get it anywhere. I have to listen to it on that site, and nobody. Sometimes these songs just don't appear anywhere, and you're like, "Why don't you put this somewhere?" And you can't. It's just like I was listening to Miley Cyrus. She was doing a Jolene song, and it was on YouTube, and it was unbelievably good. But I can't find anywhere else, so I have to
Yeah.
watch it on YouTube. I'm like, come on, put this on a track. And but anyway, so how's that impacting things?
Yeah. AI is a super interesting wrinkle in the whole music industry. Now, obviously, there's a lot of concern, right? Um, the amount of data and source material that an AI LLM needs to feed off of to create compelling content brings up obvious concerns with copyright usage and breach of copyright and fair compensation, things like that. So, like a lot of major publishers are very anti, but the industry is all in all coming around. Um, what we're starting to see from some institutions is specific licensing for AI learning, which will inevitably create new royalty revenue streams for music, which is a good thing. We always like to see new revenue streams come up. Um, we talked about earlier how AI is enabling a lot of artists, giving them access to higher quality production support, things like that. So that's a positive too. Um, but kind of an unspoken or underappreciated aspect to it is I think that these AI engines are going to do quite a lot for the sophistication of reporting of royalties, which I think all in all will help. A rising tide lifts all boats, so to speak. Part of that is just from the sheer volume of dollars coming into the space. A lot of funds buying up big catalogs, demanding more transparency, more data. And then, with the tech support of various AI models to help provide that reporting, I think it's going to go quite a long way. Um, Historically, the reporting, particularly from the international side, has been a little bit lackluster as far as detail, but it's getting better every year. So I think that that's going to help that quite a bit. And then, yeah, the new revenue streams are exciting too. As they say in the industry, life needs a soundtrack. So every time we have a new platform or a new method of royalty generation is generally a positive. But it's all a little bit too early to see, right? It all kind of depends on how those agreements shake out and what kind of compensation ends up being penned for the AI learning and those models. Still early days, so it's just in the last 6 months or so that we're starting to see those first drafts of AI training licenses being put out. So,
Well, I'm curious in your perspective on this because, if I take somebody else's music and create a mix and create another song, I have to pay rights to the other artists, assuming certain criteria are met. I don't know what they are, but I know you
mhm.
pretty much have to pay them. Um, but with AI, I create a song that's, use in this example, 50 Cent and a jazz kind of background. They're not really using 50 Cent stuff because it's brand new. It's inspired by 50 Cent, but it's basically a brand new song.
Mhm.
Well, do they have to pay rights? Who owns it? Like, I mean, there's a whole
Yeah,
bunch of questions. I don't know if they figured it out, but like, where does it sit today?
yeah, it doesn't sit today, and that's kind of where it's headed, right? Um, the last I looked at it is it was okay, what music was fed into this LLM that created this end result piece, the 50 Cent piece. And as I understand it, the cash compensation would flow to those creators from the music that was fed into the AI system. Um, but yeah, the nuance of how that shakes out, I don't think anyone has that figured out yet.
And how do you prove it?
Right. Yeah.
How
AI
do you prove it
checking
was
AI,
inspired by
right?
that?
Yeah. But I think it's less of a inspiration versus a what was technically used,
Right.
right? Because the AI is taking all of everything that it has to create content. And so technically, by that logic, all of everything that was used should get a credit to it. We're talking massive, massive amounts of data points to kind of consider there. So we'll see how it shakes out. But that's the direction that it looks to be heading.
Okay. Well, I enjoyed the conversation, John. We're going to have to wrap it up here. What are some final thoughts or some areas that we missed you think people should know about?
Um, I think the most important selling points of royalties that come to mind for me are is twofold. First is the cash yield. Um, just aren't a ton of assets out there that give you cash for owning it. Um, the way we structure it is it's no maintenance, it's effectively turnkey. So it makes it a really compelling hedge against traditional markets. Um, And then beyond that, there's still a ton of growth happening in the music market. So again, I mentioned earlier the rising tide lifts all boats philosophy um, certainly applies here. We're seeing emerging markets in Latin American markets, in Indian markets, in Asian markets, and access to music systems through Spotify, Apple Music, whatever local systems, um, is going to just add to the pool. I think year to date or 2025 compared to 2024 is probably more accurate. Saw a 10% increase in streams, general streams. And we've seen that historically every year for the last 5, 6 years, and shows no signs of stopping. Just more people having access to music. Um, yeah, and so the tailwinds, passive income. So I guess three things, and then the diversification from traditional markets. Those are the big key pieces that we look at that make it really really compelling. Yeah, so those are the main takeaways. If you have questions, reach me on Royalty Exchange. Pretty accessible. Also, can be reached on LinkedIn if that's easier. A lot of what I do is just answering questions about how this stuff works, talking through the ecosystems and how to look at this stuff. So, yeah, happy to lend my time.
Okay, great. Well, I appreciate you coming on, John. Um, and yeah, this is interesting. I'm sure that landscape will keep changing, so we'll have you back on the future. So thanks again for joining us.
Cool. Thank you, Kirk.
Hey, Doug, did you hear? We're giving away free money. Well, I'll tell you about it in a minute, but before I do, there's a saying in the mining community, well, precious metals mining, that is. The saying is that if you want the best deals, you have to be in the room. Now, you're probably thinking, what does it mean to be in the room? Well, I'll tell you. Being in the room means that you're on the short list of people who get invited to be a part of the best deals. These are the deals that most investors will never have access to. You mean like IPOs? Nope, IPOs are chump change. Those are for retail investors, small potatoes. That's nothing compared to these deals. These deals would have you salivating to get access to them. Once you know they exist, you will never look at investing the same way again. I almost don't want to even tell you that they exist because it will ruin your thinking of how the investing world really works. Now, you might be excited that these deals exist, but you only have access to the deals if you're an insider, or in the room as they call it. Now, as loyal listeners to the show, I'm going to give you a chance to be in the room. Money Tree Investing Podcast has created the Insiders Club. This is a community of our show's members who are loyal listeners of the show and want to get more out of their investing experience. Being a part of the Insiders Club gives you insider status for upcoming events and webinars, discounts, free stuff and books, and influence on the future direction of the show. This is a great opportunity to join us as we expand our content and services. Oh, and did I mention free money? Yes, in the next few weeks, I'll be giving away free money to our members of the Insiders Club as my appreciation for listening to the show. Now, there's no cost to join the Insiders Club. Just go to moneytreepodcast.com/free money today to join the community. That's www.moneytreepodcast.com/free money. I hope to see you in the room.
All right, that was a great interview with John. Really appreciate you coming on the show. Now we're into the panel portion of the show where we have our very own Phil Weiss. Hey, Phil.
Hey, Kirk. Happy to be here.
Glad to have you. And we also have our very own Mark Walton. Hey, Mark.
Hi, good afternoon, gentlemen. Thanks for inviting me again.
Yeah, glad to have you both on. So Phil, what were some of your takeaways from the interview?
So obviously, John knows his stuff. It's an interesting area that when I think about it, it's just not something that I'm going to dig my teeth into and look to put into client portfolios or anything like that. There's just a lot of things that I don't know. Look, I know when it comes to having a diversified portfolio, there's lots of different things that go in it. But this is just an area where for me, it's hard for me to get there. Doesn't mean that you can't, it's just like anything else, right? If you have knowledge about an industry and you're comfortable with that knowledge and you spend the time and effort to learn about it, it can fit. And it's a source of income, which is always something people are interested in, especially when we have a relatively low interest rate environment. But for me, this is just not an area that I can see putting my clients into.
Okay, makes sense. Mark, what about you? What are some of your thoughts from the interview?
I, as you know, I kind of I'm not a regulated advisor like you guys. I'm a trader, so I am open to more interesting, shall we say, areas. And I mean, I was a musician for 5 years, and I've got a little bit of knowledge about the music industry, but very, very small. And yes, John was very interested. He clearly knew his stuff, and therefore he could talk all day about the subject, and he knows what he's talking about. But to me, it would be a bridge too far for me. I mean, I've been invested in cannabis at some point this year and various other weird and wacky things, and but this would be a bridge too far for me. I think the potential downsides for it are quite scary, and just basically not really fully understanding it, like Phil says. You need to understand something about where you're putting your money. And so for me, no, I wouldn't be willing to go that far. I think that when you look at particularly the culture that we have these days, when somebody can be a superstar today and then suddenly something happens, comes out from their past and they get cancelled, where does that leave you if you've invested in it? And I mean, I think Bruce Springsteen sold his full catalogue for $500 million. And when that came out, it was like, how the heck? I think it was Sony that bought it. How the heck are they going to make the money from it? I know that eventually that I think it's on death. Is it something like 70 years after the death of a creator? So they've got a fair old period of time to make their money. But I mean, I don't know if you know the story, but the Beatles in the 60s in the UK, the income tax rate went up to 97.5%. And one of the Beatles' songs was about the tax man. And so what the Beatles did, they thought would be really clever, and they would create a company, and therefore everything that they did went through the company. However, the company then got bought out by the record company. Paul McCartney in later life was recording with Michael Jackson, and apparently they became big buddies. And Paul McCartney made the mistake of telling Michael Jackson that actually buying catalogues of music was a really good investment. And Michael Jackson went behind his back and bought all the Beatles royalties. So there's that aspect to it. There's the cancel culture, as I say, as well. And bottom line is, if you don't understand it, I would leave it alone. And I am a lot more willing to take on risk in some of the crazier stuff. But no, even for me, I wouldn't go near this.
Well, Mark, you might realize that cannabis investments are correlated to music investments. So maybe that's not a good diversification strategy.
Yeah.
Just saying.
No comment.
Although it might enhance your music investments. You never know.
I suspect some of the best songs ever were helped by some recreational subjects or topics. Yes, for
I would
sure.
agree with that. I would agree. Some of the best were probably written by recreational drugs. So Phil, let's look at this from talking about correlation. Let's look at this from the correlation standpoint, right? So we have an investment that probably nobody here is invested in. Listen to the show, but is it worth looking at from a correlation standpoint?
It's possible. I it seems hard to me to believe that music royalties are going to be correlated well with what's going on in the stock market, except for the fact that you could say that maybe royalties are higher when there's more wealth created. So if we have a good market, that could benefit this industry. But I think a lot of the contracts are going to be more long-term in nature. So I don't even know that that's going to happen. So I don't, if you're looking for an uncorrelated asset, this could be a place to look. It's different than interest rates, right? Because it's really in the income part of the portfolio, not the equity part of the portfolio to me. And so I don't think that it's going to be heavily correlated and move similarly to how interest rates and things like that move. So if you're looking at it from that aspect, it does have some merits.
Yeah, and just for reference, the reason you look for assets that are non-correlated is in a typical portfolio construction. Ideally, what you want are a bunch of good assets that have low to no or even inverse correlation, so that you have proper diversification. Because if you have a bunch of assets that are correlated, then the diversification doesn't matter. because you just stick it in one asset and it would do the same thing because they're all correlated. So the idea of portfolio construction is find a bunch of non-correlated assets. You got some legal settlements, you got some, you got some S&P 500, you got some cash flow from royalties, you got real estate, you got all these different assets all over the place, but realistically they shouldn't correlate to each other. That's the idea. So if one does poorly, the others should do just fine, right? That's how good portfolios should be constructed. The challenge now is everything's correlated. Um, Primarily because everything is based on institutional money flows. So, as Phil says, if all of a sudden a lot of people get really wealthy, what are they going to do? They're going to look for different assets. Well, music royalties might be one. When would you ever sell cash flow? If you need cash, right? If you're, like, oh, they're going to repossess my house, I got to go sell my music royalties, or I forget. I mean, some of these stars, they sell their rights to other people. Why would you ever do that? Well, it means you're trying to diversify away from your own stuff. You're trying to reduce your risk. So all this stuff, it's a good idea, I think. I think it's a great idea that this exists, but the question is, should you even do it? But Mark, I mean, you're an investor. I mean, this provides good cash flow for people. Is this worth buying for cash flow, or you just the non-starter?
Well, I don't know how liquid it would be in a crash. And from a cash flow point of view, the music industry and stars come and they fade. They have periods of time where they're out of the picture. I just read Rod Stewart's autobiography, and basically mid to late 90s he was on his way out. He kind of lost touch with his fan base. He wasn't writing anymore. And then suddenly he came up with the Great American Songbook and he started covering all the old classics. And that revitalized him. I think he made 4 or 5 albums from it. And then you also get situations like with Stewart years ago. He has a song called Sailing, and it was featured on a television program in the UK, which was, I think there were 2 or 3 series of it, which was all about the British Navy when they used to have some ships in the old days. And so then it came back into vogue. But I don't know about the liquidity of it, and I don't know about how stars fade. I think when you look at Springsteen with the 500 million, I would think perhaps it might be more to do with estate planning than anything else, you think, rather than diversifying away from his work. I mean, Taylor Swift's just gone through a thing where she had a fight on her hand to get her hands back on her material. And in the end, she kind of held them over a barrel by re-recording it all and then managed to buy it back. But also, you look at Spotify. I was looking today. Bon Jovi, I think, sold 130 million albums over the years. Well, nowadays, to get to number one in the UK, I think you can sell about 5,000 in a week. So it's been completely revolutionized because it's on Spotify. But on Spotify, you've got to get something like 30,000 streams a month, I think it is, to earn $100. And so even the big guys, Ed Sheeran's one of the biggest ones. I think he's earned over 200 million. But in the conventional way, selling albums in the past, selling million copies as Bon Jovi did, that was completely different. I don't know how much the record companies took out and all the rest of it. But yeah, I think liquidity would be a concern and seasonality of stars. And John touched on it in the interview as well, is nobody knows what the effect of AI is going to be. I read that I think there's supposed to be 60,000 new songs a week published. 60,000. Many of whom don't go through record companies anymore because people can pitch straight onto Spotify and YouTube, etc. It just makes you wonder. In fact, I remember there was a radio program in the UK, and I remember in about the year 2000, they said that they put the musical notes into a computer and multiplied it by the amount of new music then, 25 years ago. And they reckoned by about 2020, there would be no more new music because there's not an infinitesimal number of notes. And so everything that's made, and a lot of what you hear now is being rehashed from older stuff. But yeah, I would be concerned about the liquidity. I'd be concerned about seasonality. And as I said earlier, I'd be concerned with, how many rock stars in the 70s, when the 70s, you might not remember, Kirk, but Phil and I will do, it was a different generation. I mean, you would go to a pop concert and there would be girls literally throwing themselves at these pop stars. Nowadays, oh, they would be slaughtered for it. And how many skeletons are in cupboards that suddenly comes out tomorrow that your favorite band is now suddenly banned? Well, no, no.
Well, let's be honest. Women are not going to stop throwing themselves at rock stars. I'm pretty sure that that trend has not stopped. I mean, it sounds like you got about a decade on me, but I do recall in the '80s, in the '90s, when people would go to shows, and you see all these shows like Motley Crue, like you see the documentaries or whatever they're. I don't know. It's not a documentary, but the shows on Netflix about them. Motley Crue and all the stuff they did, like you knew that was going on. Like
Oh
that
yeah,
was everyone knew it. It was just like, women would just kind of go to these concerts and try to get in the back, and it's like, okay. Like I mean, that was a big deal. They were famous. You could touch famous people. Like back
yeah,
then, like the lifestyles and the rich and famous. Remember that show? Like you never got to talk to those people, but rock stars, you could talk to them.
yeah.
Athletes, yeah, they're a lot
Yep,
wealthier now, but athletes, you could touch them. Like they'll
yep,
give you signatures, autographs. But yeah, I agree with your sentiments though on the technology front. I think, as an asset, I think this is really interesting. I'm always intrigued by alternative assets that are outside of the realm of what people normally do.
yeah,
Does it mean it's a good idea? Not necessarily, right? Like there are people who invest in horses. We actually have a client who trains horses and buys them, trains them, and sells them, and makes good money. But that's his profession, right? If I
yes,
were to go to buy a racehorse, I wouldn't know what the hell I'm doing, and I'd probably end up getting a nag, and it would just, you have to put them down. Like you have no idea because you're not the expert. So I don't think people should play in places that they're not an expert. If you want to, you have to become an expert, which
yeah,
takes time and a lot of time. Um, but what I would say, the thing that concerns me most about royalties is AI, as you said, is technology. What is going to happen? I mean, I see this happening right now. You had, I think Ben Affleck was captured on a video clip talking about this for the film industry, and he's very nonchalant. He's like, it's going to completely change the film industry. I mean,
yes,
if you can use AI to make a movie, why do you need actors and actresses? You
yeah,
don't.
no,
Right? And are people going to watch it? I don't know. Maybe there's something different about watching AI versus something that's human made. You can like not necessarily
you
feel the
can now,
difference, but you could definitely kind
yes,
of feel the difference in the visual and the audio. And
yeah,
I've 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 heard Joe Rogan had a thing on his podcast a while back where they paired 50 Cent with like some old school um I don't know what you'd call it. It's not jazz, but it's old school like soul. That's like soul kind of music, and it was
yeah,
awesome. Like I was just shocked. So, like you said, there's only a certain number of notes. I think the reality is that if you have AI crank out, an infinite amount of music,
yeah,
eventually you're going to get some hits. But then, if it's just a computer program, eventually you run out of
yes,
like potential songs. I think it's going to dilute and destroy the music industry because it's like a blog post.
yes,
I mean, it used to be like 1,500 would be put out an hour of real people. Now you've got millions put out every hour because everyone just runs an AI program.
yeah,
I think it's going to dilute and water down everything, which effectively destroys it. Um, so I don't know where it goes, but on the other hand, there is something to be said about originality and about
yes,
if you think about uh, you think about old cars, right? Why do people buy old cars? And there's a lot of reasons. Nostalgia, just the coolness factor, just it's you could buy a new car that's better. Why do you buy an old car? There's something about it that's just special, right? And so I think we will always have that. I mean, why do people still buy books? I buy books because I like the feel of it, right? Why do people buy old rare books, right? Or signed books by the author? I don't think that part of human nature will go away, but it's going to dilute everything else. I do agree with your sentiments there. I do see it as a potential issue. Um, I don't know enough about music industry or royalties to be, to speak clearly about this, but I have a concern about that. Um, I also wonder, like, okay, great. So why are people still buying the Beatles? I don't hear Beatles songs on. Like, how are they getting paid? What's the cash flow? I just don't know.
No.
I'm very curious on what that income stream looks like. I imagine it's like a asymptotic curve, right? It starts really high and then it goes low and then it stays low. It stays probably similar, but I don't know what that looks like. What happens when the baby boomers die and they're the ones listening to the Beatles? Like, does that mean nobody listens to the Beatles anymore? I don't know. Like, these are just questions I'm curious about. But those are the questions you should ask ultimately if you're looking at something like this.
Well, it's funny. It's funny because to kind of pull all those strings together, I went and bought a 6-year-old car last week. And I went to test a brand new Mercedes first, and I drove the car, and it was a very nice car, and it got all the bells and whistles, and it did everything, and it was fast. I like fast cars. And I came home and I said to my wife, said, "What do you think?" I said, "Well, it's a really nice car, but you know what? It doesn't. There's no passion in it." So I went out and bought a sports car. I've had my second midlife crisis. I've gone out and bought a sports car. It growls when you turn it on. It goes so fast it's untrue, and I love it. But the other thing that was with the music, the young lady who was the sales lady, when we went out on the test drive, the car picked up my Spotify, and I was listening to it was all the older classics, 70s, 80s, 90s stuff. And she said, "Oh, I love this stuff." And she wasn't the typical, I'm agreeing with you because I'm selling, because her dad's into it. My kids listen to stuff. You look at the Rolling Stones. The Rolling Stones just finished touring at 81 years of age. I mean, none of these guys should physically be alive anymore. And the whole point of rock and roll, it was a young person's thing. And I agree with you. I think at the moment there's still a lot of listenership from kids from my generation because that's what they grew up listening to. But eventually, when we've gone and they've gone, I don't know. I mean, again, it could be a generational thing, but there's not many artists I listen to, modern ones, that I think are still going to be playing stadiums in 40 years' time. So yeah, I agree with you on the cars. I agree with you on the music. I don't know about the movies. I think you've had some movies have come out that I mean, I was never into it, but there've been a fair few that have come out that AI's created. The thing with AI is it's getting better. They're certainly not going to need stuntmen and women much longer because the stunts that they can do with AI now, you can create for a fraction of the money and risk and everything else. The days of Tom Cruise throwing himself off the sides of a cliff, as he did in the last film, but yeah, the world is changing. We don't know what's happening, and uh, as you say, ultimately you've got to stick with what you know to some degree.
Yeah, I would say interesting point. I'm into movies, and I can tell you that I love movies. I love action movies. I love dramas, just mystery. All this. I'm a huge fan of movies. I don't like movies that are 50 years old. Gone with the
No,
Wind. What was the other one? The one with Rosebud.
Casablanca.
No, no.
I
I
don't like that Maltese Falcon. Like I don't watch those movies either. I
No,
just know
no, no. The
names.
the one it was stated as like the best movie of all time. God. Anyway,
oh, Citizen Kane, maybe.
Citizen Kane. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
So you have these old movies, right? And people deem them as the best movie ever. I watch them like, ugh, like I didn't. It
that's
just
because your
what.
age.
Yeah, it just wasn't for me. I've seen
No,
them; they're interesting, but like, would I watch them again? Probably not.
no.
But movies of my era, there's something about some of these movies that, there's just like my favorite movie of all time is Scent of a Woman, which part of it is, the end scene, the final scene, which is just an unbelievable monologue. That was just fantastic.
Hmm,
And I went to prep school, so I understand that scene very well.
hmm.
But the point is you see movies like that, and there's just something about it that just grabs you. And you're like, wow, that was just a well done movie. Um, I have to say, Al Pacino has some unbelievable monologues. It's just the thing for
Yeah.
him. He's just done some great monologues in movies. But then I look at some of the newer ones, like like the action movies. You look at like the Avengers, like they did a good job with that. Now, if you look at like the new era where everything's on streaming, movies and shows are crap.
Mm.
Like, it's just watered down crap. So
Yeah.
if I'm looking at like a movie, like let's say like an Avengers movie is like a 10, let's say, for example, and let's say a show like Game of Thrones is a 10, if you're putting a rating scale, right? Let's just assume that's your rating. Um, they just did a spin-off from Game of Thrones, and I would put it at maybe a 3, maybe a 4, right?
Okay.
And you look at all these, series, maybe a 4 or 5 for a lot of
Mm.
the series, right? You look at movies, I see these movies and I'm like, they're good enough where I can't turn it off, but they're not good enough where I'm enjoying it a lot. You know, it's like, the first bite of ice cream is great. By the 50th bite of ice cream, you're like, ugh, I can't stop eating this, but I'm disgusted with myself, like, and that's kind of how I feel like with these new movies. They're not very good.
No.
They're okay, where I'm getting some minor enjoyment. But it's not enough where I would be like, oh, I can't wait to watch that thing. Like
Mm.
Game of Thrones is like, oh my God, I can't wait to watch the next one. When's the next one going to be on? Now the new ones, I'm just like, ugh, I guess I should probably watch it as the last show. Like it's a very different feeling, and I feel like
Yeah.
there's a bit of being watered down with quality right now.
Yeah.
Whereas when you had to spend the money, when you had to put together a budget, you were very discerning about what you would put out because it was expensive. Now you could put it out at cost, a 20th of the amount of the old stuff. If you had to have all these high paid actors and this, all this AGI and stuff, and now or CGI, and now you could just have AI do it all for like a 20th of the cost. You're going to crank out 20 more movies, but they're not
Yeah.
going to be as good.
No.
And that's the challenge I see with all of this IP stuff is that you're going to get some great stuff, but you're going to get a lot of watered down crap. And that's what my fear is with all this stuff is that, the new stuff is just going to be watered down and it's not going to be
Mm.
great. There will be some great stuff, but I don't think there'll be as much. I think the percentage wise, it's gonna be harder to find because it's gonna be more crap, more
Mm.
mediocre stuff. There'll be some great stuff in there, but it'll be a lot harder to find. That's, when you dump everything on Spotify, how are you gonna find the good stuff? Like at some point
Yes.
that kind of comes into play. Um, Phil, we're gonna kind of wrap it up here. I'm curious on your thoughts on cash flow. Like, forget the music stuff, but just royalties in general. Like, there's a lot of royalty models. There's precious metals or mining royalties. There's royalties on lots of stuff. There's royalties on patents, on IP, on pharma. What are your thoughts? What do you think about the royalty model?
So I'm going to bring up an example. It's not one that you just said because I remember back when I worked for another firm and I was responsible just for the portfolio. And one of the things that we invested in, there's oil and gas companies that are modeled around royalties. And so there were like companies like Kinder Morgan and Plains All American and companies like that that basically got paid royalties. That was their business model. And it was for moving natural gas and moving oil around. And you would make investments in these things thinking great cash flow. They would pay they'd pay really strong dividends. They were structured as master limited partnerships, which created a little bit of tax complications, but they were supposedly had like guaranteed revenue streams. But here's what happened. If you go back, like, I think it was around 2015, 2016, oil prices tumbled. And all these guaranteed contracts that these companies thought that they had, the oil companies said, no way, because
No.
oil prices fell too much and they couldn't support it. And those stocks got hammered. And like, if you think about any of these industries, there's always going to be the risk of exogenous events like that that can take what you think is a sure revenue stream away. And like we're talking about music, right? Mark's made several mentions of artists who can come in and out of favor, right? And so you're tied to this artist and he or she is really popular, the group is really popular, and then their popularity falls off. And now you're not getting the same revenue stream. So like that's the risk that comes with this. Cash flow is great. Like we're all looking for cash flow, right? Because the hardest thing for people when they retire, or I think one of the hardest things is the idea that we worked our whole lives. We knew we got a paycheck every week, every 2 weeks, every month, however you got paid. And you knew that money was coming in. And hopefully you saved, and now you get to retirement. And now we have to create a retirement paycheck. And a lot of people, that's a hard concept for them to understand. It's like, where's my money coming from? And I'm like, well, that money that you saved, we're going to come up with a way now to pay that out to you. So they want cash flow. And like, if you have investments that produce cash, well, that helps to reduce how much cash you have to take out. Because some people are like, oh, I don't want to spend down my portfolio. And all those things. So cash flow is a good thing, but you always have to remember that there's risks that come with it. There's no cash flow that's guaranteed. And the closest I guess you could come, like I could make an argument that like if you had like sovereign debt in a company like the US, that's pretty close to guaranteed that you're going to get those interests. Like that's why they are so highly rated. You get like really strong companies and they have debt. Like that's pretty close, but it's really hard to be able to guarantee, especially when you start to get into all these other type of investments that you mentioned, Kirk. Look, real estate is another area, right? You have real estate investment trusts, and they get paid and get cash flow out of the rental income that they get. But then if we have a bad economy and now tenants default and tenants move out and leases don't get renewed, and now that cash flow is impaired. And so then Mark talked about liquidity. You own some of those things too. You can't sell them because they're very liquid investments. And
Yeah.
like you go to sell them, the company might not even let you because there's a lot of rules around when you can. So cash flow is great, but you want to make sure that you're comfortable that that cash flow is going to be there through good times and bad. Because if you lose that source of cash flow, how are you going to replace it?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that's an important piece of this. Phil, wrap it up. Final thoughts. Where can people find more about you?
Sure. So I'm Phil Weiss, and I know experiencing big life transitions can be stressful. My job is to help empower women facing new beginnings with the financial knowledge and tools they need to make self-assured decisions. My firm's Apprise Wealth Management. We'd love to get to know you. You can visit our website at Apprise Wealth, that's APPRISE wealth.com, to read and sign up for our weekly blog. Thanks for having me on today, Kirk. Enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, thanks again for coming on, Phil. And Mark, final thoughts from you, and where can people find more about you?
Well, as Phil was saying, we were talking last week with Barbara, and Barbara was talking about REITs, and I said to her, I was telling her the story in London, and I think it was in the 70s, and again in the mid 2000s, they wouldn't let you pull your money out. So you bought these REITs, and because the price of property was falling so much and the interest rate was going up, what was supposedly a rock solid investment, suddenly you were not allowed to pull the money out. So that would be the big thing. The other thing, going back to this music thing that John was talking about, the return was only, I think, about 12% a year. Well, if you're going to go into something highly speculative, you want to be talking big numbers to make the risk for it. So for me, yeah, I definitely I agree with what's been said. It's quite funny, Kirk, with you, because when you start talking about movies, you became so animated, and because you're so passionate about it. And yet, I saw an interview recently you'd done. It may even been with John, where you said you wouldn't put any money into the film industry. So even though you know something about it and you're passionate about it, you still wouldn't put money in it. Anyway, for me, you can find me at Mark Walton. It's Mark with a C, markwalton.com. I teach people how to trade and how to build portfolios as retail and how to look after their own money.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, Mark. Thank you both for coming on the show. Actually, I'll address that really quick because it's a great comment. Um, I wouldn't invest in the film industry because, in general, it's not a good investment.
No.
My understanding, and I'm not the expert, but my understanding is people invest in the film industry because they want their name in lights, because they want to be
Yeah.
famous. They want to have their name attached to a big movie as, hey, I made all my money doing this other thing, and I'm going to invest in movies so that I can be famous too. That's my opinion of it. I know that the movie industry is a lot smarter than the investors in general. Like the people who make money, if you think about the people who make, why do they keep making movies, right? People make money in the movie industry by a lot of different methods, and all the ones I've seen, they're basically carving out all the juicy stuff for themselves. They're not giving you that. They're giving you like, oh, if the movie does well in the box office, you'll make some money. Otherwise, you're not going to make money.
No.
So loving movies and I think is a great comment because loving movies and wanting to invest in them are two different things. I
Yeah.
enjoy the film. I don't know that I'm an expert at the business. Same thing with music. I enjoy music. I like rock and roll. I like the rock and roll, the hair bands like that. That was my era. I enjoy that stuff. Do I understand music royalties? Not really. I mean, I could learn about it, but I wouldn't say I'm an expert. It would be cool to invest in like your favorite song or band, but the question is, do you want to be cool? Or do you want to make money? Right? Um, you know this, Mark. Do you want to be right or do you want to make money?
Yeah,
There's
for
a
sure.
human psychology about this, and
Yeah.
I look at it as like the ESG movement, or what was before that, the socially responsible funds. People wanted to make a difference, and I asked them. I said, "Do you want to make a difference? Or do you want to make money?" They're two
Yeah.
different things. You don't necessarily do the same things at the same time. If you want to change the world, investing in clean energy stocks is not the way to do it because you're not changing anything. If
No.
you're investing in a new startup, yes, you're changing it. But if you're buying it on the stock market, you're not doing anything. Like
No.
you're not changing anything, period. And
Yeah.
I don't think people understand that. And that's, a lot of people say I want to invest in smoking or, tobacco or alcohol, whatever. I get it, but it doesn't change the company. You're not harming
No.
them in any way.
No.
So I think there's that piece is kind of where Wall Street pulls the wool over. But look, making if you have money, your first job is to make money, and then your second job is when you make profits, you can do whatever you want with them. But if you conflate the two, at the same time, you probably won't make money. And that's
No.
I guess that's kind of my final thoughts.
That's the show for this week. Thank you again for joining us on Money Tree Investing Podcast. My name's Kirk Chisholm, wealth manager of Innovative Advisor Group. We don't just manage your wealth, we make your life better. You can find more about me at innovativewealth.com. And of course, you can find me every week here on this show. You can also check out our show at Money Tree Investing Podcast. On our website, you'll have access to the show notes, resources, and the archive shows. Please remember to subscribe on our YouTube channel for immediate access to the new shows when they're released. When you subscribe to the show, it allows us to get access to some of the top minds of investing in personal finance. While you're here, please leave a comment and question if you want us to address it on the show. Have a great week ahead, and remember, no one will care about your money like you do, so invest in your life.